My name is Catherine, and I'm the friend that interrupts everything to take a photo. At formal events, I'm usually asked to be a volunteer photographer. At informal events, I usually self-designate myself as a photographer. Even right now, for my job, I'm sort of like a part-time videographer. Why do I keep doing this? Well, I'm in love with capturing memories, and I like the idea of stealing a moment of time so that I can look back on it later. As we began our quarantine adventure, my camera roll started to look quite uneventful. It was basically exclusively photos of me and this picnic blanket, because what else was there to do? And so, like many of you, I tried to compensate and pick up a few new hobbies in lockdown. And like for many of you as well, most of them lasted a week. There are a few gems, however, that survived even my attention span. One new hobby that was recommended to me was to take up listening to podcasts. One podcast in particular, Revisionist History by Malcolm Gladwell, stood out to me. In the episode Free Brian Williams, Malcolm explores how faulty our memory really is. This resonated with me as somebody who romanticizes nostalgia and adores looking back on memories. Listening to it was a tough pill to swallow, and the fact that it made me so uncomfortable confirmed for me that it had to be the topic of today's last lecture. So I'd like to welcome you, class of 2021, to the last lecture. As a fellow graduating student joining you in the next installment of life, I would like to present memory, our most valuable tool, and what this means for graduation. We live life by looking forward to the next day. This typically is on autopilot until a day comes along, let's use graduation for example, that we deem is significant enough for us to stop, breathe, and look back over our shoulders. When we look over, we like to think that recalling memories is like pulling up an old videotape, where you can replay it as many times as you want and the content will remain as is. But as Malcolm taught me, this is not at all how it is. In reality, memories are sometimes lazily recorded, and even the act of recollection alters them in some way. Here's a fun example that's relevant to us. Let's talk about flashbulb moments. In the podcast episode, it was explained that these are supposedly vivid, enduring memories associated with significant and emotional events. Individuals often claim they can recall minute details, including what they're wearing at the time of the event, what they're doing before and after, and who they were with. They have great confidence in these memories, but they're not always accurate. Well, what institutes a flashbulb memory? First, you need a flashbulb event. Flashbulb events are big, dramatic incidents that sear themselves into our memories. A quick search will give you several examples of studies that look at flashbulb memories associated with negative events like 9/11 or positive ones like the moon landing. There are many studies where participants were asked to recall the events immediately after they happened, and researchers followed up with them again in a few months and then again in a year. As expected, most people's memories fail them, even during, supposedly, the most dramatic events of their lives that they swear they remember as if it were just yesterday. People are often shocked at one, how terrible their memories are, and two, how confident they've always been in these terrible memories. Well, this could not be a true lecture unless I gave you all an assignment. So let's do a little flashbulb experiment of our own as a graduating class of 2021. So, what significant event in history occurred during our undergraduate experience? There are plenty to choose from, so I'll have to pick one. And I know that a few of you might be thinking about the epic conclusion to the Marvel Phase 3 saga Endgame, but I'm actually thinking about the global pandemic that we're still experiencing today. On March 13th, 2020, the University of Guelph announced its closure as a response to COVID-19. Do you remember what you were wearing? What were you doing before you opened up that email? What about after? Who were you with? Unfortunately, we missed the opportunity to record these answers immediately after the event, but we can start at this 1-year mark. Compare your answers with someone that you think you were with, and again in 5 years, try this exercise again, if you remember. I did this exercise too, and luckily for me, and thanks to technology, a part of my flashbulb memory was actually captured on camera. This story was posted on the Engineering Society's Instagram on Friday, March 13th, 2020 at about 2 p.m. I was handing out free pie in the lounge with Thorne, actually just a few steps in that direction, in honor of Pi Day, which was March 14th, but we had to celebrate the day before because of the weekend. And I want you to take another look at just how happy I was right there. And now take in that within an hour at 3:06 p.m., the Office of the President sent out the email to us all and announced the university's closure. I don't think I've ever been so sad while eating an obscene amount of pumpkin pie. And that's my friend Andrew over there, who was running the event too. I specifically remember him trying to cheer me up, saying, hey, at least this 2-week break will give us some more time to study for our midterms, Catherine. And yeah, I did absolutely swell on my systems and control theory midterm, but at what cost, Andrew? And that's how I remember my day. Even seeing this Instagram story though, and talking to some people that saw me that day, I realized how poorly I remembered it. And when you finish this assignment, you might realize how terrible your memory really is too. Does this make you sad? Is this such a bad thing though? Maybe the best part of memories isn't actually looking back on them. Could it be that the sweetest part is just making them? Maybe like me, you're afraid that one day these memories might escape you. To that, I want to assure you that it's okay because they've served their purpose. Today, we celebrate our uniquely individual journeys, spotlighting our own versions of what we defined as success and victory. For these fortunately coordinated bunch, the victories might have been a win on the fields. For the academically inclined, it might have been a paper published or a midterm conquered. For the hopeless romantics, me, it was the courage to ask out that really cute barista. And for our international friends, maybe it was carving out your first new experience in this new country. For many of us, it was mastering the timing of bolting out of your 12:20 lecture in Rosansky to beat the lunch rush at the bull ring. And if you couldn't make it, you always had Bob waiting for you with a hot dog and some great tunes. These memories made the days worth experiencing. And if you can't recall every single aspect of them years later, it doesn't make them any less magical. I know when you're retelling your own stories of your time at the University of Guelph, it'll be tempting to focus on the ending, this global pandemic, instead of all these other aspects I just mentioned. Isn't it unfair that the future has a say in how we experience our past? I've always adored the thought of one day speaking at a last lecture, and I was excited to mention all of the endearing moments that we got to share. But it would be wrong to ignore the massive elephant in the room. So how do we deal with reframing our narratives to acknowledge that we're graduating during such, and everyone together now, extraordinary and unprecedented times? To today's theme, another way our memories often fail us is that we tend to focus too much on the endings. That's actually another concept in psychology called the peak end theory developed by Daniel Kahneman. And I like the way that Chip and Dan Heath puts it here in really simple terms. They say that when people assess an experience, they tend to forget or ignore its length. Instead, they seem to rate the experience based on two key moments. One being the best or worst moment known as the peak, and two, the ending. And I know for a lot of us, this pandemic was both the ending and the peak moments, which means that it might take up a disproportionate amount of space in our memory vaults. What can we do about this? Well, to start, don't let this dwindle the magic of all those other victories that made up the majority of your experience here at Guelph. I also want you to think about the lessons that resulted from the journey that 2020 took us on and the one that 2021 is showing us today. How we learned to forgive each other for fumbling with technology, and how we learned that relationships require effort and communication, especially when you don't have a convenient excuse to run into each other anymore, and hopefully how we might have learned to take care of ourselves just a little bit better, listening to our own needs and realizing that little things actually matter. Maybe in 20 years, you won't be able to recall the pains of having to wash your mask every day, but you will remember the feeling of responsibility to protect your community. Maybe in 20 years, you won't remember every single board game night with your friends, but you will remember the feeling of being at home with the people who love you. Isn't it incredible to know that some of us may have meandered a little longer, maybe diverged, took a few detours here and there, but at the end of the day, we almost always come home to the same universal lessons that make life meaningful and worthwhile. No matter how you spent your time here at Guelph, I hope you learned that people grow at different paces and they show love in different ways. And I hope you realize that wisdom never came from age, it comes from doing things. In other words, you are now wiser than you were in first year, not because you've aged, but because you've lived. So, what lessons have you lived that you can tell your past self? What are you going to remember from school? Again, I'd encourage you not to focus on the rules and the details of your program, but to take a step back and think about the larger lessons. For me, I probably won't remember most of the technical lessons of engineering, sorry Dad, but I will remember the most important lesson that I think I was supposed to learn, and that is that engineering design is inherently human. No matter what major you're graduating from, you can also apply this lesson, and I think it's one worth remembering. We use numbers, tools, and programs in the process, but at the end of the day, the problems we will solve are human, the clients we will serve are human, and the mistakes that we will inevitably make are also very human. Sometimes it can feel like we're encouraged to strip the humanity out of the design process in order to make it more efficient or less vulnerable or susceptible to error. But in fact, the more human we make our solutions, the more creative and wholesome they can become. Because at the end of the day, it's about the people that you care about and the people who make up your community. This is what matters, and this is what is important. No matter what profession you find yourself in, you will be designing something in some way. Designing art of all forms, designing processes and procedures, designing and facilitating human connection. Feel free to disagree with me, but I really think that there are two design tools that are instrumental to success. You can see these two traits around the Guelph campus all the time. Think about the people who borderline, violently chase you down when you leave your sunglasses in the library, the stranger who compliments your shoes at the bus stop, the newest paint job in the Canon every other night, and the way that as a community, we humbly embrace change in creative and innovative ways. What do all of these people have in common? The greatest design tools of all, empathy and creativity. These two values are something that are embodied in the definition of what it means to be a Griffin. So here's your final assignment, is to simply just think. Think about how, one, our memory can be fallible, but this does not make our lives any less magical. Two, we can address our faulty memories by focusing on the big picture, while still appreciating the little things as they come and as they go. Three, to continue to do what we've always done as Griffins, and that is to be empathetic and creative. And that, my friends, is how we, as graduates of the University of Guelph, will improve life. Thank you. Yay!